This is the Create Your Own Life Show, episode 849, Freestyle Friday Edition.
We look externally for abundance. The truth is it comes from internally. And it really is finding abundance in what you have so that you can search for more. One of the things that I really focus on when people are looking at abundance is the questions that we ask ourselves. You know, we grow up and we're told there are no stupid questions. And to some degree, that's accurate. But to another degree, when we look at how our brain responds to certain questions, there are actually a couple of stupid questions. So when we ask why and how things happen, right? Why am I here? Why has this happened to me? How did I get here? It forces your brain to go backward into what it already knows. This is why most people stay stuck, because they want to understand why they are where they are and how they got there, but that doesn't help them move forward. And so when we're looking at what do you do right now, it's asking questions that help you move forward and create progress, even during this time that feels like it's challenging.
This is the Create Your Own Life Show, where we interview people that are world-class performers, from Super Bowl champions to New York Times bestsellers to billionaires. We figure out what makes them tick and unpack it for you to do the same. I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate, and every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we help you to create your own life. Hey, what is up, everybody? Jeremy here. It is Friday. It is the 19th of March, 2020, and this is the Create Your Own Life Show. So we're trying a new audio-video setup today, so everything's a little bit different. I know we were testing running the DSLR camera you guys are seeing me through an HDMI, but we ran into some problems with the camera we're using not having a clean HDMI. So we're back on USB. We're trying a different mic angle. We're trying some different stuff, guys. I want to give us an ability to kind of get a different view on things here, and I'm trying some new stuff out. So thank you so much for spending your day with me. This is a Freestyle Friday episode of the show where we talk about something going on in the world, something I find interesting, or just something I really think that you guys need to know about out there in the world. Sometimes even a speech from history, and that's the history nerd in me bringing that to you guys. So on this Freestyle Friday episode of the show, we have a guest for you today, which I'm very, very excited for, and we'll get into that in just a second. But it has been an awesome week here as we led the week off with Patrick Byrne, the former founder of Overstock.com, and we talked a lot about, you know, what's happened in the last year and I guess what you guys can do about it. We had Marty Kagan as we talked about developing and creating amazing products and how you can really build innovation. And I think this is a great way to round it out, as today's guest is super cool. And I'll get to that in just a second. But before we do that, I want to quickly tell you guys about today's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Audible. And the wonderful people at Audible have offered all of you beautiful people out there a free month of their service and a free audiobook download. Right now, I am reading Unmasked by Andy Ngo. It is inside Antifa, and it's a very, very interesting read. And Ngo is spelled Ngo, but that is Unmasked by Andy Ngo. So if you want to get that book or any other book for free, courtesy of Audible, just head over to jeremyryanslate.com/book. That is jeremyryanslate.com/book. All right. If you guys are watching this on YouTube and seeing the video version of this, or if you've checked us out on Rumble, where we are now, since I mentioned, we are trying to talk every now and then about some edgier topics. So those episodes won't be on YouTube, as our Monday episode with Patrick Byrne cannot be found on YouTube, but it is on our Rumble channel. So you can check out the Create Your Own Life show either on YouTube, or you can look at the Jeremy Ryan Slate channel on YouTube. If you're checking out the podcast version of this, you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever else you like to listen to the show, you can do that as well. And while you're over there, leave us a rating and a review as well if you're listening to Apple Podcasts, because that's what helps other people to, you know, really see the success that you guys are having with the show, as that really is the goal. Oh, man. So we are, I guess April 15th is my deadline on when I have to have the manuscript of my book Extraordinary to the publisher. We just had a meeting about it yesterday. And man, there's a lot of work left to do in this yet, but I'm really excited for the direction it's going and kind of the method I built around this. I've kind of started, and I didn't want to write a book that was just like, hey, here's the transcripts of people I talked to, because you guys have already gotten that. You're getting this to get, you know, further input and interest and things like that. So I started with transcripts, melded them into stories, and pulled out some of the real gems in really some teaching. So I'm really enjoying the process of this, and I can't wait to share this with you guys. We are looking at a fall release. I don't know what that date is yet, but we will have it for you very, very soon, which I'm very excited for. But let me tell you guys about today's guest. Today's guest is Laura Treonze, and Laura is an incredible human being. She is an executive coach, and she specializes in helping people get the most out of their life, handle a lot of the chaos in their life, and at the same time live a fuller life. So we're going to talk about getting out of your own way. We're going to talk about motivating your team, and we're also going to talk about raising strong-willed kids, because that's something I've been doing as well. So this is a really, really exciting episode if you are a high achiever that's looking to go to the next level. So everybody, without further ado, let's get into this interview with Laura Treonze. Hey, what is up, everybody? Jeremy here. And guys, I am very excited for the guest we have today, because she's doing some very big things in helping executives to really make a big impact and to, live awesome lives at the same time. We have Laura Treonze with us today. Laura, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Jeremy, thank you for having me. You know that you're my podcast idol, so I'm so excited to be here.
Oh my God. At least I'm somebody's podcast idol. I got my 2-year-old still steals my microphones and tries to eat them and all that kind of stuff. So I'm glad to be someone's podcast idol.
You're my podcast idol.
I want to find out, because you're making a really big impact helping executives, which are people doing really big things and running companies and stuff like that. What made you want to, get into that area and help those people?
Well, so it's really interesting. Ironically, started off in real estate, and the company that I was working for, they used this assessment to help guide people into what part of real estate is best for them. And so I just became obsessed with this assessment. And, my broker would say to me, like, I don't understand. These people have really big goals and they're not making them happen. And I'm like, well, give me their assessment. Let me see. So I said, well, we're taught like go for no. Well, their behavioral style says that rejection is their greatest fear. There's no way they're doing that consistently. So people started coming to me with their assessments and saying like, hey, can you take a look at this with me? And then I realized, wow, this is bigger than just real estate. And so I was working with an office and I said, hey, listen, I want the whole office to take it. And he's like, the owner was like, no, people are never going to take this. I'm like, really? Okay. By the time I left, 90% of the people in the office had taken it. And they were like, can you give this to my spouse? There's a children's assessment. Can you use this with my kids? And so I decided that I really wanted to take the next step with helping people get to their goals based on who they are instead of some system that works really well for other people. So if I was going to be a coach, I decided to hire a coach, and I hired a Tony Robbins coach. And I'm sure he's just one of the best of the best. So I worked with that coach, and then that coach said, hey, listen, have you ever thought about being a Robbins coach? And so I was like, no. But I went and served as a Tony Robbins coach for 2 years. And then it's an amazing company to be with. I loved it and knew that I wanted to go on my own because I wanted to be able to say yes and no to whatever clients I wanted to work with.
Sure.
And so I've been doing that, and I'm just really blessed. All of my business right now comes word of mouth, and me helping people has people saying, hey, listen, you know who you need help from? Like, Laura can help you. So that's sort of how I got my start, and how I ended up working with business people is it just 100% of people come to me to make more money. And yet I say 100% of people talk about their personal lives, because we're not separate people. It's hard to separate the two. We're all one. So that's how it all started.
So, and I don't know how to ask this question, because and I've just found this out in the first few minutes of talking to you here, you're very easy to communicate to. And it seems like that must be something that for you, happens a lot, right? Because people came to you with, here's my assessment. What do I do? Have you noticed that trait in yourself, or is that something that you've really, focused on working on?
Oh, what a beautiful compliment. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Actually, my entire life, people would tell me random things about themselves. And I'm one of those people that I really do make friends in elevators. And I'm sitting on a train. I remember I was interning in Washington, D.C. as a college student. This guy started telling me about his life. I'm like, oh, that's really fascinating. It has been people tell me things. And what was really interesting is while I was a realtor, before I started to get into coaching, I had a coach. And he said to me, if you could do anything, what would you want to do? I'd love for people to just talk to me. I'd like to just get paid to talk to people. And he's like, well, why don't you do that? I'm like, who would pay me to talk to them? And, now here I am 10 years later. I'm like, I pinch myself every day that this is my work, because it does come naturally. People do tell me things, and I feel honored when people let me into their journey. I mean, it really is such a gift.
It's very cool. And looking at that world of executives, like the work world has changed a lot, like to even say the least in the past. We're going on a year now, I think in just a few weeks here when that's going to be. So from your perspective, let me lay this out first. From me talking to people over the last year, I've learned that one of the biggest problems for business owners and for executives is their team trying to figure out like time management at home. Like how do I work on my computer at home and how do I do these different things at home? So I guess from that perspective, how have you seen like time management needs change, in the past year? And what do you really tell people to balance out their time?
That's such a great question. And, when I look at time,
because it's got two sides to it, right? It's got the leadership side of like, you have to figure out how to help your group, but also like, it's got the side of, the employee as well.
Well, so yes, absolutely. There's two sides. And yet when we look at time management, people want to manage time. It's like this false sense of like, we all have 24/7, right? Like this is what we have to deal with. I really look at how do we manage our energy? And when we're talking about managing our energy versus managing our time, it's no longer a fight. We really look at like what fills us up. Okay, what can we do to do more of that? So I'm looking at helping executives get clear on where do you want your energy to go? What do you want your experience to look like? And also, what can you get rid of? It's so important to set priorities because the bottom line is if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is people get caught up into responding to life instead of creating the life experience that they want. And the key to a purposeful life is to really look at what is the experience I want? How do I communicate that to others? And then how do I live that consistently? Mm-hmm. And I think that's really what I help my clients do is put those three pieces together so that they can stay on track.
So in terms of that, then how do I transfer that idea like to a team, like to a virtual team? Because at the same time, like I can figure it out for myself. And that's really important because like you can be in not such a good place where you can't be, good for other people. But how do I transfer that then to like people that actually work for me? So
such a great question. And I think that it first starts off with the individual, right? Looking at what does the individual want their experience to be, mm-hmm. and then looking at your overall experience and how does the individual fit into that experience? I think so often we go the other way. I mean, how many salespeople have you heard of who are like, oh my God, I have this crazy goal. Oh, well, who set the goal? Oh, management set the goal. Well, what did you do last year? Nothing close to that. Okay, well, how often do you reach your goal? We don't often reach our goal.
Well, that's called a problem.
Right? Why do people keep setting goals that can't be reached? And so, really looking at what is the overall result that you want for your team? And then how do each of the individuals fit into that result? And you're using much of the same equation. You're mm-hmm. kind of just flipping it, right? So you look at your result and then how do the people fit into it while looking at each individual goal and what do they want? Because you can't want something for someone more than they want it for themselves.
That's a really interesting viewpoint because the thing that made me think of is a lot of times we're telling people what we want from them rather than what do they want, right? Because when you can figure out kind of the happy medium between those two, that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. Well, and it closes the gap, right? Mm-hmm. Most often, when we're hiring people, we hire based on skill and we fire based on attitude. And so we're not doing enough to understand what is the attitude, what are the wants and desires of the people that we're hiring. Mm-hmm. When you look at Gallup has a poll every year of engagement, it averages around 67% of people, U.S. working population, are disengaged or actively disengaged in the workplace. And I look at that, and obviously I see it through my filter, which is there's a disconnect between what they want and what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that has to do with helping people get clarity around what they really want and then articulating that and putting it into practice in the workplace.
And that engagement poll, I think that's why people like me are huge fans of the TV show The Office, because you're like, wow, it's real and life is really like that.
Yeah. During the pandemic, I watched every single episode of The Office. It is one of my
at least 2 or 3 times
favorite shows.
But I always look at Stanley and I'm like, is he ever working? Like he's always doing a crossword puzzle or Sudoku,
That is, I think I saw him on the phone a couple times.
Well, I guess looking at the idea of like, when you're time management too, there's also the idea of like overcommitting to things, right? Like I know from myself, I learned this the wrong way, right? By doing too much of it is I like to say yes to people, but the problem is you end up resenting it when you say yes to a lot of people. So how do you handle like not committing to too many things?
Well, I think that there's two different pieces of this. I think first is addressing the issue of saying no. We have this sense, especially people pleasing type people, like we should say yes, we should say yes. And we're not considering the negative of the no. And so we do that. We tend to overcommit. So it's important to recognize that no does not a negative. It's just owning your availability of time instead of it means I don't care about the person. It means I don't care about what they're doing. It means that this project isn't important. No has no meaning except the meaning that you give it. And so I think it's really important to recognize no as a tool for prioritizing. And so this comes back to that idea of what are your priorities? And I said it a few minutes ago, when everything is your priority, nothing is your priority. And most people have a really hard time, especially executives, because we're trying to do more with less, have a really hard time of honing in on what is your priority and knowing that priorities, people want to set these huge goals. I'm going to look out 5 years from now. Well, if you set goals 5 years and the pandemic happened, they're out the window. So let's really chunk it down and get closer in time and look at what are your priorities over the next 3 months? What are your priorities over the next 6 months? And chunking it down into smaller pieces help people stay true to their priorities. And then, obviously having a coach, having a manager, having an accountability partner that holds you accountable to what you said you wanted. That's another key.
This episode is sponsored by Command Your Brand, your source to build your brand, get more business, grow, and create the attention that your brand really deserves by becoming a guest on some of the most top-rated podcasts in the world, just like this one. If you want to get out there, get more attention, and grow your brand, then Command Your Brand will help you define exactly who you need to be in front of, help you tell a better story, locate and book you on the right podcasts, and also help you create content that's going to create even more ROI for you years down the road. So if you want to find out more, head over to commandyourbrand.com, drop a line, and figure out how you can start to take command of your brand. Well, I think that ability to pivot's like really, really important as well, because you mentioned like, hey, if you have a 5-year goal and the pandemic came, like, well, you're kind of up the creek without a paddle right now. I want to say something else there. I just interviewed Jeffrey Hazlett. He's a keynote speaker. And he was saying like, I honestly don't care if I step on another stage again because I usually do 150 keynotes a year. I did 360 last year because I figured out how to do them virtually. So also at the same time, you can figure out how to take that and pivot, and planning that far in the future doesn't always let you to do that. You have to be willing to budge when you have to.
Such a good point. Most often we're so focused on how we do it, we forget the why we do it, right? So, I do, live keynote speaker. I'm a live speaker. Well, wait a second. What's the purpose of you speaking? Because if you focus on your purpose and the real result, I want to share my value, I want to reach as many people as possible, you do have that ability to pivot. Where when we get caught up in our plans, we're like, I've got to stick to the plan. If I don't stick to the plan, then I don't know what to do next. So making sure that your result is more focused on the end, in keeping the end in mind, rather than how do I do it?
Well, so Laura, I want to pivot a little bit here, because at the same time, like another thing that has, it's always kind of been a part of our lives, but it's entered in a lot more with a lot of people working from home right now, is trying to manage kids, and that we love our kids and we want to hang out with them. And sometimes I feel guilty when I don't play with them as much as I'd like to because I'm home. I guess looking at this, how do you balance raising strong-willed children, which I definitely have one, with, being a highly successful executive so that you can be present and everything?
Well, so it's such a good question. And I'm going to talk about strong-willed kids because I too have one, and they are just such a gift. But first, looking at kids in general, right? I think that there's another place where you can take all of the things that we've been talking about in terms of setting your priorities and looking at, what type of experience do you want to have as a parent? When I say that, most parents laugh because they're like, what do you mean? What type of experience I want to have? But you can't create what you want unless you've defined it. And so I think it's really important for parents to decide, like, what do I want the experience with my kids to be? I want to be calm. I want to be cool. I want to be collective. That's not my choice because that's not natural for me. But like for some people, this is how I want to show up. Great. Once you decide that, you can then look at what does it take for me to show up in that way. So the separating work from kids and this idea of balance. The other thing about balance, and
it isn't real.
It's such a farce, man. Listen, come on. It's never balanced. It's
especially when you're an achiever, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like you can get on something and just go on it for a while.
Totally. And so it's always this counterbalance. And so that's why coming back to like, what kind of experience do I want to have as a parent helps you create that counterbalance in a way that feels more authentic to you. So you can have your priorities, you can decide how you want your experience to be, and then you are given the gift of a strong-willed child. And that could just throw everything off kilter.
But I'll say they're more fun when they get going. So I won't complain about that part.
My strong-willed child is the energy in my house. And so we
went to Johnny Cash's saloon in Nashville last week. And like she's, you know what I mean? Like I feel like strong-willed kids will also do stuff that other kids won't. So she gets into the middle of the dance floor, 2 years old, and just starts like dancing, and the band's like cheering it. So it does add that element of fun to your life too,
Oh, it's so great. And when you can embrace it. And so here's the thing is often we parent based on our behavioral style instead of our kids' behavioral style.
Yeah.
And so when we do that, we tend to want to control how they behave. And when you're looking at strong-willed children, they push back on control like you won't believe. And so it's giving them a sense of choice, which gives them that sense of control. And so when I'm working with strong-willed children, the number one suggestion I give to anyone who is a strong-willed child is to make sure you're giving them options so that you're not telling them this. You're giving them options. And even for me, one of the things that I've used with both of my kids is I let them decide their consequence. So in life, there's consequence. And so instead of having them get in trouble and then I say, oh, here's the consequence, go to your room, I don't do any of that. So we look at situations that happen often and we say, okay, well, what will be the consequence when this happens again? Or what will be the consequence right now? Here's the crazy thing. Most people are like, oh, your kids will, like, they won't come up with consequences. I've done this with my kids since they were little. They come up with consequences I would never come up with. I'm like, are you sure you want to? Like, my daughter's like, I'm giving up my binky. I'm like, really? Are you sure? And then she threw it in the garbage. And I was like, okay, this is my
It's definitely gone.
This is my strong-willed child. I'll show you, Mom. I'm giving up my binky. And then that night when she was upset, I said, I'm sorry you threw away the binky. That was your choice. You made that decision. So once you remind them that they've made that decision, I didn't do that. You did that. They're like, oh, okay. And then she didn't sleep with a binky anymore. So giving them that opportunity to come up with their own consequences. And again, I use that for both of my kids. And like I said, they come up with things that you would never even believe that they come up with. And then when it comes time to enforce the consequence, I didn't make it up. You did. And so there's a sense of fairness and we negotiate, right? So sometimes they will come up with consequences that are, I'm like, is that really appropriate for this? And then we've got to negotiate. I'll come up with an idea and they'll come up with an idea. But having them a part of that conversation gives them an opportunity to not only have control, but teaches them to negotiate for what they want later in life. I'm really big about everything we do right now as a life lesson for the future. And so I want them to know that just because I've come up with it doesn't mean that's the end all be all. They get to negotiate with me. So those are a couple of things that I do with my kids, strong-willed and more traditional.
I love the idea of choices though, because I will say just in my own experience, that has been highly successful, right? Like, all right, you got two things on your plate, Adelaide. You can eat the chicken or you can eat the green beans. And after you eat one of those, we'll give you the ice cream. But like, you have to have the choice, right? So they feel like they're part of it, right? Like you're not just telling them what to do.
And then sticking with it. You know, I think that the hardest part for parents, and I'll just own my truth, the hardest part for me is consistency.
Well, and that's why parents have to be on the same page too, because if one parent isn't in lockstep with the other, like that can be hard as well. Because I know growing up, I did that with my parents all the time. Like I knew dad was the one I could get anything out of, but if mom found out, dad would be mad. So,
Yeah. Well, and with strong-willed children, forget it. Game over if you guys aren't on the same page, because they're going to work both sides and they're good at it. And so you're absolutely right. You have to be 100% on the same page with kids and giving them those options and choices. But then knowing your standard, right? And being able to explain your standard. One of my favorite stories is my daughter had come home she went to they used to have these assemblies, and they had assembly on reputation. And so she said to me, Mom, what do you think my reputation is? And so I told her what I thought it was. And I said to her, well, what do you think my reputation is? And so she said some glowing things. And then she said, strict with purpose. And I was thinking that. I mean, she was like in 5th grade or something. And I said, really? What does strict with purpose mean? Because I wanted to understand, where was this coming from? I get really, really curious. And she said, even though you're strict, you always explain what's important about it. And so I thought, man, if she gets this in 5th grade, I mean, this is great. And so having those conversations, like, I do this for this reason, it takes extra time, but it gives mutual understanding. And I also say that I don't explain for agreement. I explain for understanding. So there are times where I'll negotiate and there are times I will not negotiate. I'm explaining so you understand, not because I expect you to agree. We can agree to disagree on this. That differentiator is important as well.
So we've talked about time management here. We've talked about, what you want. We've talked about, raising kids. I want to kind of bring us back around to a little bit of where we started. And, in the past year, we've been told that, times are tough. There's not as much out there. You can't get as much. But, a lot of what you've talked about today is the idea of abundance, right? And coming at it from an abundance mindset. So I guess, like, given the times that we're in, how do we still be abundant and create a great year for ourselves?
Oh, this is such an important question. I'm so glad you asked, because we look externally for abundance. The truth is it comes from internally. And it really is finding abundance in what you have so that you can search for more. One of the things that I really focus on when people are looking at abundance is the questions that we ask ourselves. We grow up and we're told there are no stupid questions. And to some degree, that's accurate. But to another degree, when we look at how our brain responds to certain questions, there are actually a couple of stupid questions. So when we ask why and how things happen, right? Why am I here? Why has this happened to me? How did I get here? It forces your brain to go backward into what it already knows. This is why most people stay stuck, because they want to understand why they are where they are and how they got there, but that doesn't help them move forward. And so when we're looking at what do you do right now, it's asking questions that help you move forward and create progress, even during this time that feels like it's challenging. And so the questions that you can ask are, what can I do? What happens from here? And then who can I help? Who can help me? Those two questions can make such a difference because they force your brain to go externally and find answers that aren't within you. And here's the cool thing. Even if you don't have the answer in the moment, just sit silent. Like later in the day, you'll be in the grocery store and then all of a sudden you'll be like, I know who I can call. I mean, it's really fascinating.
For me, it's usually in the shower. I'm like,
in the shower and I drive, right? But your brain has two jobs: to answer your questions and prove you right. And so it's so important that you're asking the right questions because your brain's going to find the answer and it's going to prove you right.
Well, Laura, this has been awesome today. I've really enjoyed this conversation. For people listening to this, they want to connect with you or learn more about what you're doing. Where's going to be the best place for them to go?
The best place for you to go is to my website. It's purposeful-life.co. And there you're going to find more information about sort of the simple equation that I gave, which is, looking at your experience, communicating it, and then creating consistency so that you can have a purposeful life. And I also have an opportunity for you to get a survey to look at, like, how are you currently spending your time? And from that survey, what I'm going to do, Jeremy, just for your listeners, is I'm going to pick 3 people who go through, answer the survey, and fill out their information. 3 people to do a direct one-on-one coaching session with. So we can look at what are you challenged by right now? And then how can you use those questions to create the purposeful life that you want?
Very cool. Well, Laura Treonze, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for hanging out with Laura and myself today on this Freestyle Friday edition of the show. You can check out Laura over at LMT lmtworthtalkingabout.com. That's lmtworthtalkingabout.com. Or you guys can get the show notes for this episode and everything mentioned in this episode over at jeremyryanslate.com/849. Also, if you haven't checked us out on Rumble or YouTube yet and seen the video version of the show, be sure to do that as well, as we've been working really hard on creating a really awesome product for you guys over there. So you can definitely get that over there. If you have not yet subscribed to the podcast and you're listening to us on audio, or you want to listen to us on more audio, open up your phone or your mobile device or your iPad or your Android, wherever you're at. Find us in Apple Podcasts or Spotify and hit that follow button so you don't miss another new episode of the show. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, leave us a review as well, as that is much, much appreciated. All right, everyone, have an amazing day, an awesome Friday. We'll be back on Monday with an awesome interview with Michael Port, the New York Times bestseller and founder of Heroic Public Speaking. So get out there and go create your own life.